Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So today I get to chat with GT Dave, the founder and CEO of GT's Living Foods. He was the first to put kombucha on the market and has created a multi-million-dollar industry, and his company currently owns 40% of the U.S. kombucha market. He's also called the father of kombucha. And he's been a really, really great and generous supporter to Food Tank, providing product for so many of our events. It's really nice to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you as well.
This idea of living foods, I don't know if a lot of our viewers and listeners completely understand what that means. So I'm hoping you can sort of give a description of what living foods means.
Absolutely. So the definition of living foods is essentially foods that still possess that life force, which the easiest example is when you think of a fruit or a vegetable that even after you pluck it from its bush or tree or what have you, it still continues to live, it ripens, it changes, its nutrient profile evolves. And again, it doesn't last forever. So it has a semi-short shelf life.
Right.
So that's one example of living foods. The other, which is somewhat new to the Western part of the world, is fermented foods. So fermented foods can start with a raw food like a fresh piece of fruit or fresh vegetable base or something like that. But then you add active cultures, or better yet, allow wild cultures that are naturally present within this fruit or vegetable base to ferment. And what happens is really fascinating is the probiotics actually break down some of the nutrients and aspects of the fruit or vegetable, allow it to be more bioavailable for us when we consume it, so it's easier in our digestion. And then the bonus is, in addition to that, these foods not only have this new kind of life force, but they're also rich with these probiotics and beneficial microorganisms that really are void in most of our modern day diets. So again, to me, fermented foods is something that's relatively new to us, but could not be happening at a better time.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. There's a long history of fermented foods, and you said it was new to sort of, American culture and parts of the global north. But can you talk about sort of how people have been fermenting and sort of using living foods for a long time?
Absolutely. So, I mean, as you just put it, fermented foods primarily started in other parts of the world. And it was a little bit of a happy accident, because if you think about it, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we didn't have modern technology like refrigeration and freezers and all of that. And we also didn't have preservatives. So I think people looked to nature to help preserve their food, and fermentation was one of it, right? Because when you take, for instance, like fresh apple juice and ferment it, it doesn't go bad, and it almost takes on a life of its own, which enhances or improves its nutritional value. So that's kind of how fermented foods happened. And whether that's kombucha, whether that's kefir, whether that's kimchi, miso, tempeh, I mean, the list goes on and on. We're barely scratching the surface these days, in my opinion. But then the way that kind of migrated to the Western part of the world is probably the easiest example is perhaps like yogurt. Yogurt is probably the most widely known fermented food out there. But the one thing to note, and this is something that's a little bit of a problem in our country, is we take something that's beautiful and authentic and we try to mass produce it. So, for example, the yogurt that most of us grew up with, myself included, for instance, like Yoplait yogurt, is not really your traditional authentic yogurt. So kombucha and other foods like that need to make sure that they stay authentic, so they stay true to who they are as a food.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me that sort of every culture has its own kind of fermented food. You mentioned kimchi, yogurt. There are all the, sauerkraut, other things that really, speak to the culture and identity of certain parts of the world. So it's interesting how, in the United States, where we're sort of such a mix of all these different cultures, we have more access to these foods than ever before, but we have to really think about their authenticity, as you mentioned. And you've spoken about the need for kombucha sort of having a standard of identity, sort of similar to what has happened in the wine industry, what's happening now in the marijuana industry with appellations. Can you talk a little bit about why those standards are important for sort of the integrity of your product?
Absolutely. So similar to the example that I gave about yogurt, if back in the day, hundreds of years ago, if you will, if yogurt was more clearly defined of what it should be and what makes yogurt real yogurt, you would potentially avoid the issues of having like essentially a sweetened pudding, which is what a lot of the yogurts,
right.
the mainstream yogurt brands are making. So what I want to do is I want to protect kombucha for having a similar fate, right? I think right now, and even today, if you look at the store shelves, there's a lot of different products that say kombucha, but
Right.
not all of them are made the same way. And arguably not all of them utilize the kombucha SCOBY to make that liquid. And so that kombucha SCOBY is just like the apple seed or the proverbial seed of any kind of plant.
Right.
Without it, you can't really call it kombucha, just like you couldn't call apple juice if it didn't come from an apple. And so right now, consumers are more curious than ever, right? They're seeking and searching new ways of being healthy. But unfortunately, there's a lot of information out there and therefore a lot of misinformation. So people right now have this understanding that kombucha is good for you. They don't really know what makes it good for you. So that's education point number one.
Sure.
Number two is they don't really know what makes kombucha kombucha. So currently, there's really not stopping anybody from making a sparkling flavored water and calling it kombucha and then just essentially upcharging the consumer who may believe that it's real kombucha. So I really want to change that because I think consumer confusion is not good for anybody, including the category.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit? I mean, people, there's kombucha on tap at shared workspaces, or when there used to be shared workspaces. There's all of, people, kombucha has become part of the sort of vernacular, but you're right. People don't know exactly what it is and what it does. Describe what a really good kombucha does for, your microbiome or your body or, for people's general well-being.
Absolutely. Well, first, before I can answer that, it's important to define what kombucha is, right? So kombucha starts with a sweetened tea base that is fermented with an actual kombucha SCOBY. And you need to make sure that it's fully fermented. So if the liquid tastes light and barely sour and almost tastes like it's just sparkling water, chances are it is, or chances are it's been barely fermented. And just like anything in this world, if you don't allow nature to run its course, you're not really getting the full benefit. So that's number one.
Can you describe the SCOBY? I
think
it's so interesting. Yeah.
It is. Well, the SCOBY is really the crown jewel of kombucha. It is the mother, it's the nucleus, it's the center of the universe. And so that's why at GTs, we of course put so much emphasis on its importance. So what the SCOBY is, and by the way, SCOBY is an acronym for symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. We at GTs actually just refer to it as a plant because in my mind, in our minds, it's very similar to a plant in that it lives, it breathes, it reproduces itself, it needs nutrients to live, it needs tender loving care to exist, and it certainly responds to that. And it utilizes, again, the sweetened tea base is almost like a plant utilizes the soil and the nutrients in the soil. And the time and temperature that kombucha goes through during its fermentation is a lot like the sunlight and all the other things that plants need to grow.
Right.
So, at GTs, we never say that we make kombucha. We grow kombucha, a lot like a farmer grows their agriculture. And so in many ways, we're just stewards of nature. We're not trying to manipulate or control the outcome. We certainly want to encourage it in the right direction, but we let nature be in the driver's seat. And so if you allow that to happen, the end result is this beautiful, bright, bold, tangy liquid that's naturally effervescent, that has, some cloudiness to it, as well as natural sediments that occur at the bottom of the bottle. And again, it has this really bold bite. It's very, very lightly sweet. It's not very sweet, nor is it bone dry. Right. Because again, the inherent nature of kombucha is you need to kind of find this balance. If you let it go too sweet, that means you're under fermenting it. And if you let it go too dry, that means you're over fermenting it and you're potentially just creating pure vinegar. So now, assuming you have achieved this peak quality and potency of kombucha, which is at GTs is what we strive for, the end result is that it's this living, breathing, beautiful, living liquid that when consumed, especially on a daily basis, it helps detoxify the body, it helps restore balance, and it helps to replenish the gut. So when you add all these things together, what essentially happens is your body is returned to a healthier state, and then the body can actually defend itself and heal itself, which is really important because what I have learned is that as the 25 years that I've been doing this, I've navigated a lot of different products, a lot of different trends. And, you have to be kind of wary of the foods that pretend to be drugs, right?
Sure, sure.
That say like, you do this specifically, you're going to get that. And I
Yeah.
tend to shy away from those because it feels too much like snake oil. And that's why I love kombucha, because kombucha is far from that. It doesn't cure you or heal you. What it does is cleanse the body, restore it to a healthier state so the body can actually heal itself, which to me is the spirit of health food.
Right. That's what you want all food to do. Food is medicine, not food as a drug, but food is its own
Exactly.
medicine. Can you talk about what it takes to grow a good kombucha, like this growing of kombucha? So you described it a little bit,
Yes.
but how does this happen? How do you get this SCOBY in place? Well, I think that's like a little bit of what's confusing to people.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's
A lot of
this
people don't
weird
even know
little
where
animal.
SCOBY comes from, right?
Right, right.
So first of all, I mean, there's a lot of theories about where the first kombucha culture first began, or how it came to this planet, so, if you will. So I won't bore you with all those random theories and conspiracy ideas.
Sure,
I think,
sure.
in my opinion, it likely was found in a body of water because the kombucha is completely hydroponic. So it exists in a liquid medium. It doesn't
Right.
exist on soil. It doesn't exist in a powder, all of that. And so, again, just assuming kombucha was found naturally in nature, many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago, because keep in mind, the first time that kombucha was recorded being consumed was 221 BC. So that's a long time ago.
Sure, for real.
So, yeah. So essentially what happened is way, way, way back when, I found this culture, put it in a tea base or something like a tea base with a little bit of a sweetener, because the sweetener is essentially the fuel or food for kombucha. Like most fermented foods, they're living, so they
Yeah.
need something to kind of fuel their propagation, if you will, or their cultivation. And then you put it in this tea base with this culture that, again, looks a lot like a mushroom. And that's another big misnomer about kombuchas, because the culture has somewhat of a circular, rubbery texture. If you think about like a portobello mushroom, a lot of
Right.
people think kombucha is a mushroom, which is a complete misnomer. It's not, doesn't have any kind of fungus qualities or anything like that. But like a medicinal mushroom, kombucha is very much an adaptogenic. So when you allow this kind of circular, rubbery culture to exist in this tea base for anywhere from 7 to 30 days, depending on the size of your batch. Now, that's a very important detail. Is just like everything in nature, you want to keep things simple and keep things intimate. So your average batch, for anybody that's listening, whether they're making it at home or whether they're making it for a business, in my opinion, you really want to limit the size of the vessel to 5 gallons or less, because anything bigger than that, you're really just starting to make something else, and
Sure.
you're not getting the full potency of that culture because you're kind of stretching it too thin, if you will.
Right.
And so once you allow this natural fermentation to take place, where the active microorganisms in the SCOBY utilize the caffeine, the tannins, and the carbohydrates of that sweetened tea base that you put it in, after that fermentation period, you're literally experiencing a complete transformation of nutrients. So, call it, you start with ABC ingredients. By the time the fermentation concludes, you end up with XYZ ingredients. And what that is again, it's naturally effervescent, so naturally carbonated. It's no longer sweet. It no longer really possesses the flavor of a tea. It actually tastes more like an apple cider vinegar because it's bright and tangy. And what makes it tangy, and this is super important, because a lot of people say, oh, I want to drink kombucha, but I don't like the sour vinegary flavor, so that's why I buy X brand.
Sure.
What you want to make sure is that you're not selling yourself short, because that sourness of kombucha is really what makes it healthy. Because those are the organic acids, that's the acetic acid, which is also naturally present in raw apple cider vinegar. So if you skip that sourness because, for instance, you don't like it, you're potentially cheating yourself of the nutrients and the health benefits that kombucha could offer you.
Yeah. So we went from having this happy accident of, like bread happened, or cheese, or any other, hundreds
fermented food.
hundreds and hundreds of years ago, to what we have today, which is a multi-million-dollar industry. Everybody drinks kombucha. PepsiCo makes kombucha. How do we keep those standards? I mean, you're very focused on keeping the flavor, the integrity of the product. How does that happen when it's a multi-million-dollar industry that's growing around the globe, especially right now as people are more interested in immunity boosting foods?
Yeah, well, really always starts with education, right? You have to educate people what's right from wrong, what's beneficial versus not beneficial. Because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, people are genuinely looking to be healthy. They're not looking to be taken advantage of. They're not looking to waste their money on snake oil or something that's somewhat, a bogus or misrepresented type of food or product.
Yeah.
So I can give you several examples that are very similar to the path that I believe kombucha's on. So whether that's organic, whether that's non-GMO, whether that's vegan, there's these words that again can sometimes be twisted and distorted and then therefore kind of broken down. And so with kombucha, it's not that complex of a product, but there are certain non-negotiables. So it really is understanding how it's made, how long it's fermented, and this is the most important part, what is done to it after the fermentation. Because if you think about, and I'll give you a really easy example, if you think of like orange juice, right? Mm-hmm. Orange juice has been out for a very, very long time. I think we all know what orange juice is, but orange juice comes in many different forms, right? You have frozen, you have from concentrate, you have pasteurized, flash pasteurized, HPP'd, raw, and orange flavored drinks.
Right.
So each and every one has its own place, and call it the orange juice category, but every product, it properly represents itself of what it is. So when you go to the store and you go, I want an orange juice that's pasteurized that has no pulp. There you go. You can reach for that Tropicana, you can reach for whatever brand. In the kombucha space, you don't really have that clarity. So my thing is, I'm not here to disparage anybody. I mean, I personally believe, of course, that raw kombucha is the way to be, because if it's not raw, it's not real. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other people that may want to consume a pasteurized kombucha or a kombucha from concentrate. My only thing is I want to make sure that they know what they're drinking. Because if they are looking for a raw kombucha, but they're inadvertently reaching for a pasteurized kombucha and they don't know it because that product doesn't disclose that it's pasteurized, they may likely experience an unfavorable result. And we have learned in the kombucha space, and honestly in the health and wellness space, you really only have one time to make a first impression. And if that first impression is not a positive one, you're really going to struggle to get that consumer back into the space and win back their trust.
Right. So what does an ideal standard for you look like? What does, that education that consumers need before they even take a sip of this product? What does a good standard or code or label really, what will that demonstrate beyond the raw part of it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you want to make sure, is it made with a SCOBY, yes or no? Because you would be surprised that there actually are products out there that don't use a SCOBY. So that's the first question to always ask.
Yeah.
Hopefully the answer is yes. And from there, the question is, well, how long do you ferment it for, and in what size vessel? Because if it's a very small vessel, like 1 gallon, you can get away with about 10 days worth of fermentation. And if it's a vessel as large as ours, which is 5 gallons, you have to ferment it for 30 days. If it gets any greater than that, beware, number one. Number two is they're going to have to convince you that they're doing a full fermentation, which larger than 5 gallons of a vessel is going to involve more than a month's worth of fermentation. So for instance, if somebody says, yeah, I ferment it in 30-gallon vessels and I ferment it for 6 months, that's a good sign, because that means they're actually fermenting it. Now, don't trust just what they say. You have to let your taste buds also do some of the investigation, because when you consume it, it needs to be bright, it needs to be tangy, it needs to have kind of a personality. If it tastes like a lightly sweetened soda or a lightly sweetened sparkling flavored water, that's again a little bit of a watch out. So that's the first half. The second half is kind of what we already touched on, is ask or hopefully read what is done downstream from the production. So whether they pasteurize it or not, whether they use a concentrate or not, and most importantly, look at the ingredients list. Do they add anything else? Because some brands now, which breaks my heart, are adding things like lactic acid, malic acid. They're adding other things to kind of trick this taste of fermentation. So if you really study the ingredients list, and then better yet, call your favorite brand and ask some questions,
Sure.
you'll be really enlightened with what it is. And the more they do to their kombucha, the less quality it is, because the best kombucha is really, as I said earlier, just allowing nature to be its best and to allow it to
Right.
shine.
Yeah, like most foods that are
Yeah, like
delicious.
most foods. Yeah, keep it
The more
simple.
you exactly, the more you leave it alone. Well, so you've been doing this for 25 years now, and that's a long time to be doing, any one business.
Yeah.
But the popularity has exploded over the last decade, and so is that surprising to you? Did you anticipate it?
I would say yes and no, right? So I would say yes. I'm surprised. Well, let me start in a different way. So, no, I'm not surprised with the popularity of kombucha, because back in 1995, when I had my first glass of kombucha, I was blown away, right? I was so taken aback with how interesting, unique, and special kombucha was, just from an experiential standpoint. And
Sure.
then after that, I was really impressed with how it made me feel. You can't make that stuff up, right? Not
Yeah.
no marketing in the world can convince you that something is changing your body for the better. So
Mm,
that was really kind of the heart and soul of kombucha, which is, of course, that in conjunction with how it helped my mother with her breast cancer was really what kind of spearheaded me to explore making kombucha in a commercial form, because I really wanted it to be available to others, because I believe
right.
they would have the same kind of connection. Now, what I am surprised is how mainstream kombucha has become, and how never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be competing with a Pepsi owned brand or a Coke
Right.
owned brand,
Right.
and seeing kombucha in cans and seeing it out of the refrigerator and all this stuff. Nor would I ever expect for my kombucha to be demonized. I mean, I have
Mm,
actually heard over the course of the last 5 years other people or even other brands saying, "Oh, ours doesn't taste gross and vinegary," or "Ours doesn't have those bizarre strands in the bottle." And again, I'm
mm,
pretty shocked, because I was like, "Well, if you don't have that stuff, well, I don't know what you're making, because that
right.
really is kombucha." So that's been
Yeah.
a little bit of like the bittersweet kind of experience of the recent kind of mass appeal or mainstream positioning that kombucha is happening. It's a mixed bag of good and bad.
Sure, sure. You don't want folks to think these sort of glorified sodas are actually the product that you're making. And yeah, that I can imagine that that's very difficult to sort of combat when you're trying to educate people and create awareness.
Yes.
I am also interested, you have other products, and one that I'm particularly interested in is the hard kombucha, which I haven't had. And can you talk about, I mean, this goes sort of, you're really focused on health and living foods, but you also have this, a product that is, hard. It's a
Yeah.
harder version of it. Can you talk about how that came about?
Absolutely. So before I describe hard kombucha, I want to say that we created it because we believe in providing options for our fans and brand lovers. And if our fans are saying, "I potentially want a kombucha for a different occasion," then we
Sure.
want to make sure that they have a great option that really is the purest and most potent form of what they're seeking.
Sure.
So hard kombucha truly comes in many different shapes and sizes. So I'll talk about the two versions of hard kombucha that I've seen. I'll start with what we make. So what we do is we still make a fully fermented, fully authentic kombucha base, which even when you try to make alcoholic kombucha, it really kind of tops out at like 1%, maybe 1.5% if you're
Uh-huh.
lucky. So as you probably have seen, the average hard kombucha is as low as 3 or is as high as 9. So the way to get to that higher alcohol content is you have to do some other stuff. So what
Uh-huh.
we do is we do what we call a dual fermentation. So in addition to allowing our authentic raw kombucha to be everything that it needs and wants to be, we then take a secondary base of, whether it's a base that's fermented with hops, a base that's fermented with almost like a noir wine, or a
Mm.
base that's fermented in like a tapache, which is a fermented pineapple juice. And we ferment those to a higher ABV, and then we blend it with the raw kombucha. So what that allows us to do is to achieve a higher ABV, but nowhere near the boozy experience of like a full
Sure.
alcoholic beer. So that's how
Sure.
we do it. And the reason why we love it is that it's more of a artisanal approach to making it. Number one. Number two, you're absolutely positively protecting the kombucha. You're not trying to manipulate it on its own. You're essentially
Mm-hmm.
enhancing it with that again, dual fermentation that I referenced. And therefore, it really is still a kombucha. Now, the other kombuchas that are in the hard kombucha category are doing different things. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's just different. So a lot of times what they do to achieve this kind of very dry, very boozy, almost like hard seltzer flavor profile is they
Right.
start with a kombucha, but in order to get that base kombucha to a higher alcoholic content, they start using beer yeast, and then they
Mm.
start using sugar, which is essentially what is the simplest way of creating alcohol and
Yeah.
arguably the most inexpensive. And so by doing that, you're able to achieve this like bone dry, almost no sugar, very booze forward, sparkling hard kombucha.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, it doesn't really have the characteristics of what kombucha is known to be. Again, that kind of
Right.
bite, that bold flavor, that vinegar kind of finish or that sour finish.
Right.
So there's options out there. If somebody wants a little bit more of, again, that hard seltzer experience, there's a lot of different brands that can offer that. And if they're looking for somebody that's kind of in between the kombucha that you know and love, but want a little bit more of that alcoholic quality, then perhaps ours is the answer to that.
Sure. I mean, I think for a lot of folks, it's about what you spoke about before, the maintaining the integrity. Like, why would
Yes.
why do you drink kombucha? And if you
Yes.
drink it for health reasons, then this is what you should stick for, whether it's your brand or a similar brand trying to do
Yeah.
kind of the same thing. So yeah.
And that's exactly it. And one thing to add is, I mean, let's be honest, alcohol is not healthy, right? I don't think we'll
What?
ever. Alcohol's not healthy, right? Like we'll never wake up and be like, I'm so healthy, I drink a lot of alcohol. So,
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
to be candid, I personally struggle with how high I would even want my products to reach with respect to the alcohol content because
Sure.
I don't drink alcohol. I personally am not a huge fan of it. I don't think it really expands your consciousness. I don't think it makes people nicer, right? I don't think it
That is
encourages
true.
people to evolve and be a better version of themselves. But I'm not here to judge, right? So as I said earlier, if fans want something that maybe is a better alternative to an alcoholic
Yeah.
drink, we're here to do that. But let's be honest, I'm not trying to say you should replace
Sure.
regular kombucha with hard kombucha and you're drinking just as healthy of a kombucha. I would think that would be wrong.
Well, let's get to this idea of better alternatives because you also make other products. There's a coconut
Yes.
yogurt. There's a water kefir. Can you talk about those and why why your company thinks those are better alternatives to sort of the originals?
Absolutely. And I'll be happy to explain. So first of all, I mean, to stay true to our name, which is GT's Living Foods, we stand for food that support life, right? And as I said earlier, these foods need to possess their own life force. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is to really protect them and keep the way they're made and the ingredients you use very, very clean and very, very simple. So whether that's, again, yogurt, which as I explained earlier, unfortunately has become very mass produced and mainstreamed in this country, I don't personally believe that whether it's dairy or non-dairy yogurt, that the consumer really has an authentic option.
Mm.
And that's why we started to make our Coco Yo, which is essentially one of the purest forms of yogurt out there because we use this raw, young coconut meat with a little bit of a raw coconut water. We blend it together, we add active cultures to it and let it ferment. And that's really it. So when you try our Coco Yo, to be honest, like initially you're kind of thinking something went wrong because it doesn't taste anything like any yogurt you've ever experienced. It's not
Right.
sweet. It's not like a pudding. It's kind of tangy. It almost kind of tingles your tongue. And then the best part is, to be candid, you really start feeling it. Like the benefit and beauty of probiotics and fermented foods is, as I said earlier, is your body reacts. And a lot of
Sure.
times your digestion responds. So whether it's this Coco Yo or the Coco Kefir, which is now our probiotic shots, you really do notice a difference when you consume them. And to me, that's why we exist. We want people to
Well,
see and experience results.
well, yeah. That's the reason I think most people take these different kinds of products. They feel bloated, or they don't feel themselves, or they want to just feel better digestively. Not to get too into the weeds of
Yes.
it, but I think that is the whole reason that people are interested in these foods because they want to feel a little bit better. you've been doing this for 25 years, and that's, for someone as young as you are, that's a long time. You've seen how the natural products industry has sort of expanded, not just for fermented foods, but sort of overall in the United States and around the world. What sort of hiccups did you have, or challenges did you have, being a young company? Then, that you see sort of young entrepreneurs having those same issues now. What advice, I guess I'm asking, is what advice would you give to some of these young startups who are trying to get into, whether it's fermented foods or natural products overall?
Wow, I could give you like an hour answer. So I'll try
Yeah.
to really make it quick. So first of all, I mean, when I started making kombucha in 1995, there was no such thing as kombucha in a commercially made drink, right? So being the
It was a
first, which
hippie drink. It was
it was
the
a hippie
hippies.
drink,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
yeah. And so being the first to make something that was virtually unheard of involves a lot of rejection. And
yeah.
so you really have to be prepared to deal with that rejection, which if you're not really rooted and anchored in your purpose, you could
Right.
easily be persuaded to give up, right? Or just discouraged that what you're doing is wrong. So that's number one. And what can come with that is what I call the peanut gallery, right? So you get a lot of unsolicited advice of how you could do better, which, I think sometimes it comes from a good intention or a place of good intention, but a lot of times it's more mainstream advice, right? I remember about 5 years into making kombucha and selling it in the stores, somebody approached me and said, "Hey, can I just give you some advice? Can you like add more sugar to this so it like tastes better? And then maybe can you find a way to like remove these strands from the liquid because they're really unsightly?" And again, if I wasn't set in my way, I might
Sure.
have taken that advice and then woken up the next day and found out that I'm now making a soda. But I
Yeah.
was so set in my way and had such conviction with making sure that my kombucha stayed a kombucha. I really stayed on my path, which
Yeah.
again was a long and narrow journey. And a lot of people don't have that appetite or that patience for
Right.
that long drawn out journey, if you will. So you also have to make sure that you ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Right.
Because if you're doing this to be rich, if you're doing this to be famous,
Yeah.
I'm going to say politely, find something else.
Sure.
Because to
Sure.
really make great health food, you have to be a pioneer and you have to, again, because success and even financial success will not come easily and will not come early. So
Yeah.
you have to find your rewards and you need to fuel your drive with other things that are not monetary. And so for me, that was knowing that I was making the best kombucha possible. And I was convinced that even if one person tried my kombucha, it would change their life. And that
Sure.
really kept me centered and grounded for the first decade, because for that first decade, as I said, lots of challenges, lots of
Right.
losses, lots of mistakes, and lots of rejection. So you have to be that. And then the last piece of advice that I'll give, which is really important, and pre-COVID, this was a big, big problem, is that as the health and wellness space has become so incredibly popular and arguably so incredibly lucrative, it's attracted a lot of big businesses and a lot of kind of big bankers and a lot of big money. So
Yeah.
what you have now, which I didn't have when I started, is you could barely even have a product. But if somebody gets a whiff of it through your Instagram or through, you're on a BevNet uh,
Sure.
telecast or something, next thing you know, you have Coke, Pepsi, a PE bank, or a venture capitalist firm all knocking at your door. And what they'll do is they'll kind of play on your, call it desperation, or play on your desire to get your product out there. And what they'll do, they'll quickly lure you in with a little bit of a courtship. And the next thing you know, if you allow them to kind of get in, you've now sold a certain percentage of your company or brand to
Yeah.
them in exchange for money. And what that can create is, one, you might have already lost control before you know it. And
Sure.
and two, I'm a big believer that too much money too soon can be a problem, because one of the things that I know allowed me to be successful early on is that I made mistakes, don't get me wrong, but I made
Yeah.
small mistakes. And it's because I had no choice. I had no money
Right.
to do this like multi-million dollar advertising campaign. But when you're a
Right.
new brand and somebody just handed you $25 million, your eyes get big.
Sure.
And candidly, I think your eyes get bigger than what your talent is able to support, or even what your professional maturity is able to support. And so
Right.
a lot of times you just make a lot of mistakes. And I've seen some really, really incredible brands that unfortunately opted to kind of bring in a PE firm or venture
Right.
capitalist firm, or even selling a percentage off to one of these big food companies. And you know what? 5 years later, they're not even around anymore.
Right.
I
They
mean, case
fizzle
in point,
out. Yeah.
look at Idwala. I mean, I know that's
Hmm.
a bizarre example to give, but it's a timely one. I grew up with Idwala, right? When I was starting
Yeah.
my brand in 1995, Idwala was like the premier super premium fresh pressed juice. And then
Yeah.
they had some issues, and then Coke came in. And recently it was announced that Idwala is going to be no more.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking. And that's why, again, I have no plans to sell, because let's be honest, my name's on the label, so I don't really want to screw it up.
Right, right. No, and I think that's really good advice, whether you're an entrepreneur or, a nonprofit. That's good advice for any sort of, business activity, because if you don't want to make those big mistakes, you want to make the small ones, and do it in a way that where you learn from them. And I think so many entrepreneurs in the food space that I've seen, they do make those big mistakes early on, and they can't fix them, and
Absolutely.
that's why they fizzle out. I know that your first SCOBY came from your dad, right?
Yes,
So this is really a family product in a lot of ways,
it is,
and
to the
and
truest
so
sense.
yeah, and so that I think builds a little bit more sort of your connection with the product, rather than some of these products that we see now where people just sort of dream them up. This is really part of your DNA in so many ways.
Yes, it truly is a labor of love, right? And that's why I got started, and that's why I I think I was so resilient to a lot of the rejection. Is
Mm,
I was so convinced that what I was doing was special, and what kombucha is special, and that it had blessed my life and subsequently my family's life. And I really just wanted to share it with the world. I was too young to understand what it takes to run a business. I was too young to even have some of those kind of entrepreneurial desires of, again,
sure.
having a company and having all the things that come along with it. I just kind of felt that I was this like little young artist, that I was crafting something with my bare hands that I just really wanted to share with the world. Luckily, it worked out.
No, and I think more food entrepreneurs should consider themselves artists. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because you are creating something that you want to be delicious and joyful and good for the world. And though, we, especially now in this, looking ahead to what's going to happen after this pandemic, we need more foods and more food businesses that really care about sustainability and personal health and well-being. I think those will be the brands and the companies that survive this.
I agree. And one thing that, and I've said this before, is I think what the natural food industry needs to recognize and never forget is that making food that people consume is the most intimate thing you can do,
Mm,
right? Because you're literally creating something that somebody will ingest that will
right.
rather make them feel good or make them feel bad.
Right.
And you need to really cherish that and not take it for granted. And I think, unfortunately, that's what we've done in this country. Is our
Right.
food has become way too transactional, which is the problem with the big food companies. And if we can kind of rewind to a place where food was really a gift or an offering that people shared, I think that would help us kind of stay on the right path.
Right. Right. You do have to honor that. You have to honor the producers. You have to honor the eaters, the consumers. There needs to be sort of more respect all along the food chain, if you will. I want to make sure people know how to find your product. They can go to gtslivingfoods.com. There's been a lot written about you. They can just Google you. Thanks again for being on the show. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot. And a reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you stay well. I think you will, drinking all that kombucha.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me on. Take care. God bless.
Thank you. You too. Bye.